The November wind carved through the streets of Chicago's South Loop neighborhood like a serrated blade, rattling the windows of Martha's Diner on South State Street. Inside, the warmth of coffee and the scent of bacon grease created a cocoon against the evening chill that settled over the city at 7:30. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow on the worn vinyl booths and checkered linoleum floor that had witnessed decades of working-class stories. Emily Thompson wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that shift, her tired green eyes tracking the movement of her cloth in smooth, practiced arcs. At 32, she carried the weight of single motherhood in the fine lines around her eyes and the perpetual tension in her shoulders. Her brown hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, showed premature threads of silver that she'd stopped bothering to dye months ago when the bills started piling higher than her paycheck could reach. "Mom, can I have another hot chocolate?" Amber Thompson looked up from her homework spread across booth number 7, her pencil hovering over a math problem that had been giving her trouble for the past 10 minutes. The 10-year-old had her mother's green eyes, but her father's dark curls, a man who'd left when Amber was 3 and never looked back, leaving nothing but child support checks that arrived sporadically, if at all. "Just one more, sweetheart. Then we need to work on that multiplication," Emily called back, already reaching for a clean mug. The diner was quiet tonight, just old Mr. Patterson in the corner booth reading his newspaper, and the Jenkins couple sharing a plate of fries near the window. Quiet nights meant fewer tips, but they also meant Emily could keep Amber close, doing homework while she finished her shift. Amber smiled and returned to her worksheet, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was thinking hard. She'd become accustomed to this routine, afternoons and evenings at the diner, the smell of coffee becoming as familiar as home, the sound of her mother's footsteps a constant comfort in an uncertain world. The bells above the door chimed, admitting a gust of cold air and Marcus Webb, the evening cook. "Emily, you need me to start prepping for the late shift?" he asked, shrugging off his heavy jacket. "Please, Marcus, thank you." Emily managed a grateful smile. Marcus had been a steady presence at Martha's for 5 years, a 40-year-old former construction worker with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor who never asked too many questions about why a single mother brought her daughter to work most evenings. The rhythm of the diner continued its familiar pattern. Emily moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. Amber worked through her homework, occasionally asking questions that Emily answered during brief pauses in her rounds. Mr. Patterson ordered his usual slice of apple pie. The Jenkins couple paid their check and left with a modest tip that Emily pocketed with a whispered thank you to no one in particular. At 8:15, the bells chimed again. This time, the sound carried a different weight. 3 motorcycles pulled up outside, their engines rumbling like distant thunder before cutting to silence. Through the window, Emily could see the riders dismounting, large figures in leather jackets, their breath forming clouds in the cold November air. Her hand tightened involuntarily around the coffee pot she was holding. The door opened. The first man through was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps in his mid-40s, with grey threading through his dark beard and eyes that swept the diner with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned to size up a room quickly. His leather jacket bore patches that Emily couldn't quite make out, but the worn leather and road dust told stories of long miles and longer years. "Evening," he said, his voice a deep rumble that matched his appearance. 2 more men followed him in. One younger, maybe 30, with sandy hair pulled back in a ponytail and a scar running along his left jawline. The other, older, stockier, with tattooed forearms visible below rolled-up sleeves despite the November chill. "Good evening, gentlemen." "Sit anywhere you'd like," Emily said, forcing her voice to remain steady and professional. Her heartbeat had quickened, but she reminded herself that bikers were customers like anyone else. Still, old prejudices and news stories flickered through her mind unbidden. The lead biker, she would later learn his name was Mason Cole, chose a booth near the center of the diner, one that gave him a clear view of both the entrance and the back. His companions slid in across from him. The younger one with the scar nodded politely to Emily. The older one barely looked up. "Coffee all around," Mason said. "And menus, please." Emily delivered the coffee with practiced efficiency, her server's smile firmly in place. As she walked back to the counter, she caught Amber watching the newcomers with undisguised curiosity. "Eyes on your homework, baby," Emily said quietly, and Amber obediently returned her attention to her math problems, though her gaze kept drifting toward the bikers. The evening continued. The bikers ordered burgers, fries, nothing unusual. They spoke in low voices among themselves, occasionally laughing at something one of them said. Marcus worked steadily in the kitchen. Mr. Patterson finished his pie and left, touching his cap to Emily on his way out. The diner felt smaller with just Emily, Marcus, Amber, and the three bikers. At 8:45, the bells chimed again. Emily looked up automatically, her server's smile ready, but it died on her lips. Two men entered, and everything about them was wrong. Their movements were jerky, aggressive. The first one, thin and wiry with hollow cheeks and wild eyes, immediately locked the door behind them and flipped the open sign to closed. The second, heavier set with a shaved head and a neck tattoo that crept up toward his ear, pulled a gun from his waistband. "Nobody move! Nobody make a sound!" the thin one shouted, his voice high and sharp with either fear or drugs or both. "This is a robbery. Give us what's in the register and nobody gets hurt." Time seemed to fracture. Emily's entire body went cold, then hot, then cold again. Her first thought, her only thought, was Amber, her daughter. Her baby girl, sitting exposed in booth 7, textbooks and pencils scattered before her, eyes wide with sudden terror. "Please," Emily heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, there's a child here. Shut up!" The man with the gun, later identified as Derek Mullins, swung the weapon toward her. "Register, now!" Emily's hands trembled violently as she moved toward the register. The button seemed foreign under her shaking fingers. Behind her, she could hear Amber's breathing, quick and frightened. The bikers had gone very still in their booth. Marcus had frozen near the kitchen door, a spatula still in his hand. "Faster!" Derek Mullins shouted, his own hands shaking as badly as Emily's. The gun wavered in his grip, and that wavering was more terrifying than steady aim would have been. An unsteady gun meant an unsteady finger on the trigger. The register drawer popped open. Emily began pulling out bills with hands that didn't feel like her own. "This is everything, I swear, just take it and go. Please, just take it and—" "Mom!" Amber's voice, small and terrified, cut through the scene. Everything happened at once. The thin man, Tyler Vance, spun toward Amber's voice. Derek Mullins's gun swung that direction. Emily moved without thinking, abandoning the register and running toward her daughter. "Don't you touch her! Don't you—" "I said shut up!" Derek Mullins's voice cracked as he aimed the gun directly at Emily Thompson's chest, and Amber screamed. It was a sound that seemed to tear itself from her small body, a primal cry of pure terror and desperation. "Save my mother! Somebody please save my mother!" The scene froze in that moment, a tableau of fear and desperation painted in the harsh fluorescent light of Martha's diner. Emily stood between the gunman and her daughter, her arms spread wide, as if her body alone could shield Amber from the violence threatening to erupt. Derek Mullins' finger tightened on the trigger, his pupils dilated, his breathing ragged. Tyler Vance had pulled out a knife, its blade catching the light. Marcus remained paralyzed by the kitchen door, calculating odds and finding them all bad. And Mason Cole rose from his booth. The movement was smooth and deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. He stood to his full height, his hands visible and open at his sides, his expression calm but alert. "Easy now," he said. his deep voice cutting through the tension like a warm knife through butter. "Let's all just take a breath here. Sit back down!" Derek Mullins swung the gun toward Mason, his hands shaking harder now. "Sit down or You'll what?" Mason's voice remained steady, conversational even. "Son, I've been looking down the barrel of guns since before you were born. You don't want to do this. You're scared, you're desperate, I get that. But this isn't the answer." The younger biker with the scar, Logan Price, had shifted position slightly in his seat, his body coiled and ready. The older one, Trevor Bennett, watched with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen violence before and knew how to respond to it. But Mason held up one hand slightly, a gesture that said, "Wait, not yet." "Give them the money, ma'am," Mason said, his eyes never leaving Derek Mullins. "Whatever's in that register, it's not worth anyone's life. Not yours, not your daughter's, not theirs." Emily's breath came in short gasps. She could feel Amber behind her, could hear her daughter's quiet sobbing. With movements that felt like she was moving through deep water, Emily returned to the register and gathered the bills, maybe $200 on a slow November evening. "Here," she said, holding them out. "Take it. Just take it and leave, please." Tyler Vance snatched the money from her hands, his eyes darting between Mason and his partner. "Come on, Derek. We got what we came for. Let's go." But Derek Mullins wasn't moving. The gun trembled in his grip, and his eyes had the glazed look of someone who'd crossed a line and didn't know how to step back across it. "They've seen our faces," he said, his voice cracking. "They've all seen our faces." "Doesn't matter," Mason said, taking one careful step forward. "You take that money and walk out that door. You're just two guys who robbed a diner. Nobody got hurt. That's small time, son. That's something you can come back from. But if you pull that trigger, if you hurt that woman or her little girl, there's no coming back from that. Your whole life changes in that instant. Everything you might have been, everything you might still be. It all ends right there." The silence in the diner was absolute. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to have faded. Amber's sobbing had quieted to a frightened whimper. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Derek," Tyler Vance said urgently. "Come on, man, let's just go." The moment stretched, thin and terrible. Derek Mullins's finger rested on the trigger. His eyes met Emily's, then drifted to Amber, small and terrified in the booth. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, of what he was about to destroy. The gun lowered slightly. "Smart choice," Mason said quietly. "Now you and your friend there, you're going to walk backward toward that door. You're going to unlock it, and you're going to leave. And we're all going to take a moment to be grateful that tonight doesn't end with somebody dead on this floor." Tyler Vance was already moving toward the door, his hands full of cash. "Derek, now!" Derek Mullins took one step backward, then another, the gun still pointed vaguely in Emily's direction, but no longer with the same deadly intent. He reached the door. Tyler unlocked it. The cold November wind rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of the city. Traffic, distant sirens, the rumble of life continuing outside this small pocket of terror. And then they were gone, running toward a beat-up sedan parked 2 blocks down, leaving nothing but the slowly closing door and the silence of shock in their wake. Emily's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees on the checkered linoleum floor, her entire body shaking with reaction and delayed fear. "Amber," she gasped. "Amber, baby." Amber scrambled from the booth and threw herself into her mother's arms, both of them trembling, both of them crying. Emily wrapped her arms around her daughter and held on, as if she'd never let go, rocking slightly, whispering incoherent reassurances and prayers of gratitude. Mason Cole returned to his booth and calmly picked up his coffee cup, though Logan and Trevor remained tense, watching the door. Marcus finally moved, disappearing into the back to call the police, his hands shaking as he dialed. "Are you hurt?" Mason asked, his voice gentle now. "Either of you injured?" Emily couldn't speak. She shook her head against Amber's hair, still holding her daughter, still unable to process that they were alive, unharmed, still together. "Police are on the way," Marcus called from the back, his voice unsteady. Mason nodded. He looked at Logan and Trevor. "We stay until they get here. We're witnesses. We do this right." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Police cars arrived, their lights painting the diner in alternating red and blue. Officers took statements. Emily sat in booth 7 with Amber in her lap, unable to let go of her daughter, even as she answered questions in a voice that didn't sound like her own. The officers were kind, professional, efficient. Detective Rachel Morrison, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner, took particular interest in the bikers. "You gentlemen are?" she asked, notebook open. "Mason Cole," the lead biker said. "This is Logan Price and Trevor Bennett. We're just passing through Chicago, stopped for dinner. And you intervened in an armed robbery," Detective Morrison said, something between respect and suspicion in her tone. "That was either very brave or very foolish. Maybe a little of both," Mason admitted. "But there was a child involved. Wasn't going to just sit there and watch." Detective Morrison interviewed each of them separately, then together. She took contact information, made notes about the Bikers Club, a legitimate riding group called the Road Warriors, she would later verify, with no criminal affiliations, and finally nodded. "You probably saved lives tonight. That Mullins character has a record, assault, possession. This could have gone very wrong." By the time the police finished and began to pack up, it was nearly 11 o'clock. The diner would stay closed for the rest of the night, maybe longer. Emily sat exhausted in the booth, Amber asleep in her arms, finally, worn out by fear and tears. Mason approached slowly, respectfully. "Ma'am, I just wanted to check on you and your daughter before we head out." Emily looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. Behind the leather and the road dust and the intimidating exterior, she saw kind eyes and genuine concern. "You saved our lives," she said simply. "I don't know how to. I don't have words for—" "You don't need words," Mason said gently. "You just need to get your daughter home safe and maybe take a few days to process all this. This kind of thing, it stays with you for a while." "What you said to him," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "about pulling the trigger, changing everything. You talked him down. You saved us without ever raising a hand." Mason was quiet for a moment. "I've known too many men who did pull that trigger, who did let a bad moment become a life-defining mistake. Figured maybe this kid didn't have to be one of them. Though the police will find him, that's on him now." "Where are you heading?" Emily asked, not entirely sure why the question mattered. "Originally, Milwaukee. But we might stick around Chicago a few days now, at least until after we testify if they catch those guys." Mason glanced back at his companions. "We've got time. No set schedule. That's the thing about the road. It's always there when you're ready for it." Emily nodded, her eyes drifting down to Amber's sleeping face. "I should get her home. I keep thinking about what almost happened. What could have happened if you hadn't?" "But it didn't happen," Mason said firmly. "That's what you hold on to. It didn't happen. You and your girl, you're safe. That's what matters." Detective Morrison approached with Marcus, who had his jacket on and his keys in hand. "I'll give you and Amber a ride home, Emily," Marcus offered. "Your car's still at your apartment, right?" "Yeah," Emily said tiredly. "Thank you, Marcus." As Emily carefully stood, cradling Amber, Mason stepped back to give them space. "You take care, ma'am. You and your daughter." "Emily," she said, "my name is Emily Thompson, and this is Amber. I think after what happened tonight, you should know our names." A slight smile crossed Mason's weathered face. "Emily and Amber. Beautiful names, you take care of each other. As Emily carried her sleeping daughter toward Marcus's car, she turned back once to see the three bikers standing outside the diner, silhouetted against the still flashing police lights. They looked like something out of time, like figures from an old movie or a story told around a campfire. But they were real. They had been there, and they had made the difference between life and death. The cold November wind swept down South State Street, carrying with it the promise of winter and change. Emily held Amber closer and climbed into Marcus's car, her mind already racing ahead to the coming days. Police statements, insurance reports, the question of when or if she'd be able to return to work. But beneath all that practical thinking ran a deeper current of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't quite name yet. As Marcus drove through the late-night Chicago streets, Emily looked down at Amber's sleeping face and whispered, "We're okay, baby. We're going to be okay." And for the first time since the door of Martha's diner had burst open, she almost believed it. The morning after came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Emily woke at dawn, her body jolting from sleep as if someone had shaken her, her heart racing before her mind fully remembered why. Then it all rushed back, the gun, the fear, Amber's screaming, the sound of her own voice begging for her daughter's life. She reached across the bed instinctively before remembering that Amber had fallen asleep in her own room. Emily got up quietly and padded down the narrow hallway of their two-bedroom apartment on South Michigan Avenue, a modest place in a modest building, but home for the past 4 years. She pushed open Amber's door carefully. Amber lay curled under her pink comforter, her dark curls spread across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. She looked peaceful, innocent, untouched by the horror of the previous night. But Emily knew better. She knew that kind of fear left marks that didn't always show on the surface. Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her daughter breathe, feeling the overwhelming relief of her continued existence. Then she retreated to the kitchen to make coffee, her hands still unsteady as she measured grounds and water. The apartment was quiet in that early morning way, before the city fully woke and the sounds of traffic and voices filtered up from the street below. Emily sat at their small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug for warmth, and stared at nothing. The events of the previous night played on repeat in her mind. Every moment, every word, every terrible second when that gun had been pointed at her chest. She should call her manager at the diner. She should call her sister Jessica, who lived in Detroit and worried about her constantly. She should do a dozen practical things. Instead, she sat and drank her coffee and felt the weight of what had almost happened settle over her like a physical thing. "Mum?" Emily looked up to find Amber standing in the kitchen doorway, her rabbit clutched in one hand, her hair a wild tangle, her green eyes large and uncertain. "Hey, baby, you're up early." "I had bad dreams," Amber said quietly. She crossed the kitchen and climbed into Emily's lap, even though at 10 she was really getting too big for it. Emily held her anyway, wrapping both arms around her daughter and resting her chin on top of Amber's head. "I know, sweetheart, I know." "Are those bad men coming back?" Emily's heart clenched. "No, baby. The police are looking for them, and we're safe here. I promise we're safe." "What if they find us?" Amber's voice was small, frightened in a way that broke Emily's heart. "They won't. They don't know where we live. And even if they did, the police would protect us. Detective Morrison said so, remember? She gave us her card and said we could call any time." Amber was quiet for a moment, then, "The biker man was nice. He helped us." Emily nodded against Amber's hair. "Yes, he did. Mr. Cole was very brave." "I thought bikers were supposed to be scary," Amber said. "That's what they say on TV." "Sometimes TV gets things wrong," Emily said gently. "People aren't always what they look like on the outside. Mr. Cole looked tough, but he had a good heart. He helped us when we needed it most. They sat together in the growing morning light, mother and daughter, holding onto each other in the aftermath of trauma. Eventually, Emily made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, though neither of them had much appetite. She called the diner and spoke to Martha herself, the owner, who'd heard about the robbery from the police and insisted Emily take at least a week off, paid. "But Martha, I can't afford," Emily began. "You can and you will," Martha interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. The 70-year-old woman had owned the diner for 40 years and had a reputation for taking care of her people. "Emily, you were held at gunpoint in my establishment. You and Amber could have been killed. I don't want you back here until you're ready and your pay continues. End of discussion." Emily found herself crying, overwhelmed by the kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much." After the call, Emily tried to settle into a normal routine with Amber, but everything felt off kilter. Amber didn't want to do schoolwork. Emily couldn't focus on the bills that needed paying. They ended up on the couch together, watching mindless television, neither of them really seeing it. Around noon, Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Thompson? This is Detective Morrison. I wanted to give you an update on the case." Emily straightened, suddenly alert. "Did you catch them?" "We did. Derek Mullins and Tyler Vance were apprehended early this morning at a motel on the south side. They still had most of the money from the diner. They're in custody now, and given Mullins' record and the armed nature of the robbery, they'll be facing serious charges." Relief flooded through Emily so intensely she felt lightheaded. "So they won't be able to..." "They won't be bothering you or anyone else for a long time," Detective Morrison said firmly. "You'll need to come in and identify them in a lineup, and you'll likely be called to testify at trial. But Ms. Thompson, you and Amber are safe. I want you to know that." After she hung up, Emily held Amber and told her the news. Some of the fear eased from Amber's expression, replaced by a cautious relief. "So it's really over?" "It's really over," Emily confirmed, praying she was right. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. Emily tried to return to normalcy, grocery shopping, cleaning the apartment, helping Amber with her schoolwork, but she found herself jumping at sudden noises, checking the locks multiple times each night, waking from dreams where she was running, but her legs wouldn't move fast enough. Amber struggled too. She became clingy, not wanting Emily out of her sight. She had nightmares that woke her crying. She flinched when doors closed too loudly. Emily scheduled an appointment with a child therapist, knowing her daughter needed more help than she could provide alone. On the 4th day after the robbery, Emily took Amber for a walk along the lakefront. It was a cold November afternoon, the wind off Lake Michigan sharp and biting, but they both needed to get out of the apartment. They walked slowly, bundled in warm coats, watching the grey waves roll in against the shore. "Mom," Amber said as they paused near a bench, "can we do something?" "What is it, baby?" "Can we find the biker man? Mr. Cole? I want to say thank you properly. We were so scared that night, and I don't think I said thank you." Emily looked down at her daughter's earnest face. The request surprised her, but as she thought about it, it made sense. Closure, maybe. A way to turn that night of terror into something more. Something that included gratitude and connection instead of just fear. "I don't know how to find him, sweetheart. He said he was just passing through Chicago. But he also said he might stay for a few days. For the police, remember?" Emily did remember. She pulled out her phone and, feeling slightly foolish, called Detective Morrison. "Detective, this is Emily Thompson. I know this is an odd question, but do you still have contact information for Mason Cole, the man who helped us that night?" There was a pause, then, "I do. He and his companions are staying at the Riverside Inn on North Ashland. They've been very cooperative with the investigation. May I ask why you're inquiring?" "My daughter wants to thank him properly. We both do. Another pause. Then Detective Morrison's voice came back warmer. I think that's a lovely idea, Miss Thompson. I'm sure Mr. Cole would appreciate that. Would you like me to let him know you might stop by? Yes, please. Thank you, Detective. 20 minutes later, Emily's phone rang again. This time the number was identified as the Riverside Inn. She answered cautiously. Ms. Thompson? Emily? This is Mason Cole. Detective Morrison called and said you and Amber wanted to stop by. His voice was the same deep rumble she remembered from that night, but without the tension and danger surrounding it, it sounded almost gentle. Mr. Cole, yes, if it's not an imposition. Amber wanted to thank you properly, and honestly, so do I. We didn't really get a chance that night. No imposition at all. We're here at the inn, room 212 and 214. Logan, Trevor, and I would be happy to see you both. When would you like to come by? Would this afternoon work? Around 3? 3 is perfect. We'll see you then, Emily. As Emily hung up, she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. What did you say to someone who'd saved your life? How did you properly thank someone for talking down an armed robber, for standing up when they could have stayed safe in their booth? But Amber was right. They needed to do this. The Riverside Inn turned out to be a modest but clean hotel in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place that catered to travelers on a budget. Emily and Amber climbed the stairs to the second floor, Amber holding tight to Emily's hand. Emily knocked on room 2-12. The door opened to reveal Mason Cole, looking somehow less intimidating in the daylight without his leather jacket. He wore jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, and his smile when he saw Amber was genuine and warm. Amber, Emily, please come in. Logan and Trevor are next door, but I can get them if you'd like. That's okay, Emily said, she and Amber stepping into the small but tidy room. We mainly wanted to see you to say thank you properly. Mason gestured to the 2 chairs near the window, taking a seat on the edge of the bed himself. You really didn't need to come all this way just for that. Yes, we did, Amber said suddenly, her voice clear and determined. She stood in front of Mason, her green eyes serious. You saved me and my mom. That man was going to shoot my mom and you stopped him. You were brave and you helped us, and I need you to know that I'm grateful, that we're both grateful. Emily watched her daughter, pride swelling in her chest at Amber's courage in facing this moment, in speaking her truth despite everything she'd been through. Mason's weathered face softened. Amber, that's one of the kindest things anyone's ever said to me. Thank you, but you know what? You were brave too. You were so scared, but you didn't freeze. You called out for help. That took real courage. I was terrified, Amber admitted. I've been having nightmares. That's normal, Mason said gently. After something like that, nightmares are your brain's way of trying to process what happened. They'll get better with time, I promise. Have you been in scary situations before? Amber asked. Mason glanced at Emily, who nodded slightly. If Amber wanted to ask, she trusted Mason to answer appropriately. I have, Mason said. I served in the military when I was younger, and I've been in a few tight spots since. It's part of why I knew how to talk to that young man with the gun. I've learned that most people, even when they're doing something wrong, don't actually want to hurt anyone. They're scared and desperate and making bad choices. Sometimes, if you can just reach the person underneath the fear, you can change the outcome. Is that why you became a biker? Amber asked. Because you wanted to help people. Mason smiled at that. Actually, I became a biker because I love riding motorcycles. The freedom of the road, the wind, the way the world looks different when you're on 2 wheels instead of 4. But being part of a riding club, being part of the Road Warriors, that's about community. We look out for each other. And sometimes, like the other night, we look out for others too. Emily spoke up. Detective Morrison told me they caught the 2 men. They're in custody. I heard that too, Mason said. That's good news. It means you and Amber can have some peace of mind. "When are you leaving Chicago?" Emily asked, and was surprised by the small pang she felt at the thought of him leaving. "We're heading out tomorrow morning, actually. The police have our statements, and we've got a rally in Milwaukee this weekend. Been planning it for months." Mason looked between Emily and Amber. "But I'm glad we got to see you both again before we left. I've been thinking about you, wondering how you were doing." "We're doing better," Emily said. "Some days are harder than others, but we're together and we're safe, and that's because of you." Mason shook his head. "Emily, I did what anyone should have done in that situation. But most people wouldn't have," Emily countered. "Most people would have kept their heads down and hoped for the best. You stood up, you risked yourself. That's not nothing." There was a knock on the door, and Logan Price and Trevor Bennett entered at Mason's call. They greeted Emily and Amber warmly, and for the next hour the group talked. Mason, Logan, and Trevor shared stories of the road. Not the dangerous parts, but the beautiful parts. The sunrise they'd seen over the Montana mountains, the small-town diner in Nebraska where they'd had the best pie of their lives, the impromptu concert in a parking lot in Tennessee where musicians had gathered and played until dawn. Amber listened with wide-eyed fascination, her fear gradually giving way to curiosity and wonder. Emily watched her daughter slowly relax, saw the shadows fade a little from her eyes, and felt grateful beyond words for these three rough-looking men with gentle hearts. As the visit wound down and Emily and Amber prepared to leave, Mason walked them to the door. "Emily, can I give you some advice? From someone who's seen his share of trauma." Emily nodded. "Don't try to pretend it didn't happen. Don't try to rush past it or tell yourself you should be over it by now. What you and Amber went through was real and frightening, and it's okay to take the time you need to heal. Talk to someone, a therapist, a friend, whoever feels right, and take care of each other. You two have something special." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mason, for everything." Mason smiled and turned to Amber. "You take care of your mom, okay?" "I will," Amber promised. Then impulsively, she stepped forward and hugged Mason quickly before stepping back, suddenly shy. Mason looked touched. "You're going to be just fine, Amber Thompson. Both of you are." As Emily and Amber left the Riverside Inn and walked back to the bus stop, Amber reached up and took her mother's hand. "I'm glad we did that," she said. "Me too, baby. Me too." The ride home was quiet but comfortable. That night, when Emily tucked Amber into bed, her daughter looked up at her and said, "Mom, I think I'm going to be okay. I was really scared, and I'm still a little scared sometimes, but I think we're going to be okay." Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. "I think so too, sweetheart. I think so too." That night, Emily slept better than she had since the robbery. She still had bad dreams, but they were less intense, less frequent. And when she woke in the morning, she found herself thinking not about the gun or the fear, but about Mason Cole's words. "You and your girl. You're safe." That's what matters. It wasn't the end of their healing journey. That would take time, therapy, patience, and courage. But it was a beginning, a step forward. And sometimes Emily was learning. That was enough. 3 weeks passed. December settled over Chicago with its particular brand of cold, the kind that seeped into bones and made every journey outside feel like a small battle against the elements. Emily returned to work at Martha's diner, though Martha had insisted on hiring a security guard for the evening shifts. A kind-faced former police officer named Vincent Shaw, who sat near the door and whose presence made everyone feel safer. Amber started seeing Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. The sessions seemed to help. Amber still had occasional nightmares, still checked the locks on the doors at night, but she was smiling more, laughing more. She'd even started talking about wanting to learn to ride a motorcycle someday, which made Emily laugh and worry in equal measure. Emily had started therapy too, at Dr. Hoffman's recommendation. Once a week, she sat in a comfortable office and talked about fear and single motherhood and the weight of being solely responsible for another human being's safety. Her therapist, Dr. James Carroll, was helping her understand that the hypervigilance she felt, the constant checking of locks, the racing heart when someone entered the diner too quickly, was normal, was her body's way of trying to protect her. With time and work, he assured her, it would ease. Life was finding a new rhythm, a new normal. And then, on a Wednesday evening in mid-December, Mason Cole walked back into Martha's diner. Emily was wiping down table 3 when the bells above the door chimed. She looked up automatically, her standard greeting on her lips, and froze. Mason stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting on his leather jacket, his familiar presence somehow both surprising and entirely natural. "Mason?" she said, and realized she was smiling. "What are you doing here? I thought you'd gone to Milwaukee." "We did," Mason said, returning her smile. "Rally was great, but I've been thinking about you and Amber. Wanted to check in, see how you both were doing." He glanced around the diner. It was moderately busy, half a dozen tables occupied, Vincent reading his newspaper by the door. "Are you working, or could you take a break?" "I can take a few minutes. Let me grab us some coffee." Emily's hands were steadier as she poured 2 cups than they'd been in weeks. She led Mason to booth 7, Amber's booth. Though her daughter was home tonight with Emily's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who sometimes watched Amber when Emily had evening shifts. They sat across from each other, and Emily studied Mason in the warm diner light. He looked tired, she thought, with new lines around his eyes, but his smile was genuine. "How are you really?" he asked. Not the polite answer, the real one. Emily considered. She'd gotten so used to saying fine when people asked, even when it wasn't true. But something about Mason invited honesty. "Better," she said finally. "Not all the way there yet, but better. I'm in therapy. Amber's in therapy. We're both doing the work. Some days are harder than others, but we're managing." Mason nodded. "That's good. That's real good. And work? You feel safe here now?" "Martha hired a security guard. Vincent over there. It helps." Emily paused. "Mason, why did you really come back? Milwaukee is 3 hours from here. You don't just happen to be passing through again." Mason took a sip of his coffee, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been on the road for 15 years, Emily. Since I left the military, I've seen a lot of places, met a lot of people. Most of them I forget within a week. But some stay with you. You and Amber, you stayed with me. I kept thinking about you both, wondering if you were okay, wondering if that night was something you could move past, or if it was going to define you. And you came back to find out?" "I came back because I care," Mason said simply. "And because I've been where you are, dealing with trauma, trying to figure out how to live with fear. I thought maybe I could help, or at least be someone who understands." Emily felt something warm unfold in her chest. "That's incredibly kind of you." "It's not kindness," Mason said. "It's connection. What happened that night, it connected us. Whether we wanted to or not, we're part of each other's story now." They talked for 20 minutes, Emily's break stretching longer than it should have. But Martha saw and waved her off when Emily glanced apologetically at her boss. They talked about Amber's progress, about Emily's therapy, about the trial that would eventually come when Derek Mullins and Tyler Vance faced charges. They talked about Mason's travels, about the road warriors, about what it meant to find family among people who weren't blood, but were bound by choice. "How long are you in Chicago?" Emily asked finally. "Depends," Mason said. "I don't have anywhere I need to be urgently. The beauty of the lifestyle I've chosen is flexibility. I can stay a few days if that's all right. I'd like to see Amber too if she wants to see me." "She'll want to see you," Emily said with certainty. "She talks about you sometimes. You're kind of a hero in her mind." Mason looked uncomfortable. I'm no hero, Emily. I'm just a man who did what needed doing. That's exactly what a hero is, Emily countered. Someone who does what needs doing when others won't. Over the next week, Mason became a regular presence in Emily and Amber's lives. He met them for hot chocolate at a cafe near their apartment. He came to the diner for meals and sat talking with Emily during her breaks. He met Amber after school one day and walked her home, listening to her chatter about her classes and her friends and her dreams of someday traveling like he did. Emily found herself looking forward to seeing him, found herself thinking about him at odd moments during her day. It had been so long since she'd had anything resembling a friendship with a man, let alone anything more. Since Amber's father had left 7 years ago, she'd focused solely on survival, on making rent, keeping food on the table, raising her daughter right. There hadn't been time or energy for anything else. But Mason made time feel different. When he was around, the weight she carried felt lighter. He had a way of listening that made her feel heard, really heard, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. And with Amber, he was patient and kind, treating her not like a child to be humored, but like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. One Saturday afternoon, Mason took Emily and Amber to the Museum of Science and Industry. They wandered through exhibits, Amber's eyes wide with wonder at the coal mine and the U-505 submarine. Mason told stories about his own travels, about the science museum he'd visited in San Francisco and the planetarium in Houston. Emily watched them together, this rough-looking biker and her bright-eyed daughter, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. Over lunch in the museum cafe, Amber asked the question Emily had been half dreading, half hoping for. "Mason, are you going to leave again?" Mason looked at Emily, then back at Amber. "Eventually, yes. The road is part of who I am, Amber. I'm not someone who stays in one place very long, but that doesn't mean we can't stay friends. There's this thing called texting, you know, and video calls. And I could come back to visit sometimes. If your mom says that's okay." "It's okay," Emily said quietly, meeting Mason's eyes across the table. "More than okay." That evening, after they'd returned to Emily and Amber's apartment, and Amber had gone to her room to work on homework, Emily and Mason sat in the small living room with cups of tea. The apartment was warm and cozy, string lights that Emily had put up for Christmas twinkling around the window, giving everything a soft glow. "Emily, I need to be honest with you about something," Mason said, setting down his cup. Emily's stomach tightened. "Okay. I didn't just come back to Chicago to check on you and Amber, though that was part of it. I came back because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About that night, yes, but also about who you are, your strength, your courage, the way you love your daughter." He paused. "I'm attracted to you, Emily. I wanted you to know that. But I also want you to know that I'm not expecting anything. I know you've got a lot to deal with, and I know I'm not exactly boyfriend material. I live on the road. I don't have a traditional job. I'm gone more than I'm anywhere. But I wanted to be honest." Emily's heart was pounding. She looked at this man, this unexpected, complicated, kind man who'd entered her life in the worst moment and somehow become part of the best moments since. "I'm attracted to you too," she admitted. "And it scares me, Mason. I haven't let anyone in since Amber's father left. I built walls to protect myself, to protect her, and you're asking me to lower those walls. Only if you want to," Mason said gently. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments or anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking for honesty, for the chance to see where this goes, whatever this is." Emily was quiet for a long moment, thinking about risk and reward, about fear and courage, about what Dr. Carroll had said in their last session. "You can't live a full life from behind walls, Emily. Sometimes you have to take the risk of letting people in." "I'd like that," Emily said finally. "I'd like to see where this goes. But Mason, Amber comes first. Always. If this doesn't work, if it becomes complicated or difficult, then we end it like adults. And I stay your friend and Amber's friend if you'll both have me, Mason finished. Emily, I would never ask you to choose between me and your daughter. Never. They talked late into the night about expectations and fears, about Mason's lifestyle and Emily's needs, about how to navigate whatever they were beginning. When Mason finally left, after saying goodnight to a sleepy Amber, he kissed Emily's cheek gently at the door. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," he said. "Thank you for being worth the chance," Emily replied. After he left, Emily stood for a long moment with her back against the closed door, her hand pressed to her cheek where he'd kissed it. She felt like a teenager with a first crush, giddy and terrified in equal measure. "Mom?" Amber's voice came from her bedroom doorway. "Do you like Mason?" Emily smiled at her daughter. "I do. Is that okay with you?" Amber thought about it seriously. "He makes you happy. You smile more when he's around. So, yeah, it's okay, plus he's really cool." Emily laughed. "Come here, baby." She held out her arms, and Amber came running, both of them hugging in the middle of the living room, surrounded by Christmas lights and warmth and the beginning of something new. Over the next 2 weeks, Mason and Emily saw each other as often as Emily's work schedule and Amber's needs allowed. They went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. They walked along the lakefront, despite the bitter cold, bundled in layers, their breath forming clouds as they talked. They took Amber to a Christmas market where she rode the Ferris wheel and drank hot cider and dragged them both to look at handmade ornaments. Emily felt herself opening in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Mason listened when she talked about her fears about money, about raising Amber alone, about wondering if she was doing it right. He shared his own stories, about his difficult childhood, about finding peace on the road, about the mistakes he'd made and the lessons he'd learned. They were building something together, brick by careful brick, trust, affection, understanding. But as Christmas approached, reality intruded. Mason had commitments, a rally in Texas, brothers in the Road Warriors who were expecting him. And Emily had her life in Chicago, her job, Amber's school, their routines and responsibilities. On Christmas Eve, Mason came to their apartment bearing gifts, a beautiful leather journal for Emily and a small compass on a chain for Amber. "So you always know which way you're going," he told Amber, fastening it around her neck. That evening, after Amber went to bed, Emily and Mason sat on the couch, the Christmas tree lights casting colored shadows across their faces. "You're leaving soon," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "Day after tomorrow," Mason confirmed. "I need to be in Texas by New Year's. The club is counting on me." He took her hand. "Emily, I don't want this to end. I know long distance is complicated, especially with Amber to consider, but I want to try. I want to come back as often as I can. I want to call and text and be part of your lives, even from a distance, if you'll have me." Emily looked at their joined hands, then up at Mason's face. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of depending on someone and having them leave. I'm scared of Amber getting attached and then you disappearing. I'm scared this is too good to be real." "I'm scared too," Mason said. "I'm scared I'm too old, too set in my ways. I'm scared I'll let you down. I'm scared I don't know how to be what you and Amber need." He squeezed her hand. "But Emily, I think the fear means it matters, and maybe things that matter are worth being scared for." Emily leaned forward and kissed him then, a gentle kiss that tasted of coffee and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet, but both were willing to try for. When they pulled apart, Mason smiled. "Merry Christmas, Emily." "Merry Christmas, Mason." 2 days later, Emily and Amber stood outside their apartment building and watched Mason mount his motorcycle. The morning was cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue. Amber had tears in her eyes, but was trying to be brave. Emily had given up on bravery and was openly crying. Mason hugged Amber first. "I'll be back before you know it," And I'll call every week, okay? You can tell me all about school and your friends and whatever adventures you're having. Okay, Amber said, her voice small. Promise? I promise, Mason said solemnly. Then he turned to Emily, pulling her into a tight embrace. I'll call tonight when I stop, and every day after. This isn't goodbye, Emily, it's just see you later. See you later, Emily echoed, not quite believing it. She and Amber watched as Mason started his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life. He gave them one last wave, and then he was gone, disappearing into the Chicago traffic, heading toward highways and horizons that Emily could only imagine. Amber slipped her hand into Emily's. He'll come back, right, Mom? Emily looked down at her daughter, at the compass glinting on its chain around Amber's neck. He'll come back, Mom? Emily squeezed her daughter's hand and looked up at the clear December sky, at the empty street where Mason's motorcycle had disappeared moments before. I think so, baby. I really think so. January brought bitter cold to Chicago, the kind of weather that made Emily grateful for the warmth of Martha's diner and the companionship of her regular customers. True to his word, Mason called every evening at 8 o'clock. Emily found herself organizing her entire day around those calls, finishing Amber's homework early, having dinner ready, clearing space in her evening for the sound of his voice. How was Texas? Emily asked during one of their early January calls, curled up on her couch with a cup of tea while Amber colored at the kitchen table within earshot. Hot, even in winter. Beautiful, though. We rode through some canyon country that took my breath away. Mason's voice carried the familiar rumble she'd come to associate with safety and warmth. But I kept thinking how much you and Amber would have loved seeing it. The stars out there, Emily. There's no light pollution for miles. You can see the whole universe. Amber would love that. She's been talking about astronomy lately. Dr. Hoffman says it's good. Her focusing on something bigger than herself, something beautiful and infinite. It helps with the anxiety. How is therapy going for both of you? Mason asked, genuine concern in his voice. Better, harder some days than others. Dr. Carroll says I'm making progress with the hypervigilance. I don't check the locks quite as obsessively. I can handle sudden noises better. Amber's nightmares are down to maybe once a week instead of every night. Emily paused. We're healing, Mason. Slowly, but we're getting there. I'm proud of you, Mason said quietly. Both of you. That kind of healing takes real courage. Their conversations became the anchor of Emily's days. They talked about everything. Mason's travels and the brothers in the Road Warriors, Emily's shifts at the diner and Amber's progress in school, their fears and hopes, and the small details of daily life that made up the texture of existence. Mason sent pictures from the road. Sunsets over deserts, his motorcycle parked by mountain lakes, the faces of his riding companions. Emily sent pictures of Amber's school projects and the snow-covered Chicago skyline, and herself making silly faces that made Mason laugh. Amber talked to Mason too, telling him about her classes and her best friend Mia Rodriguez and how she'd gotten an A on her history project. Mason listened with the same serious attention he gave Emily, asking questions and remembering details and making Amber feel valued and heard. When are you coming back to Chicago? Amber asked during a mid-January call, the question Emily had been wanting to ask, but hadn't quite worked up the courage for. There was a pause on the line. I'm thinking maybe early February. There's a charity ride I'm committed to in Arizona at the end of January, but after that I could swing through Chicago for a week or so. Would that be okay? Yes! Amber shouted, making Emily laugh. I'll take that as an enthusiastic affirmative, Mason said, amusement clear in his voice. Emily, is that okay with you? More than okay, Emily said, feeling warmth spread through her chest. We'd love to have you back. The weeks until Mason's return felt both endless and too short. Emily found herself planning what they would do, where they would go, how to balance time together with her work schedule and Amber's needs. She felt like a teenager again, counting down days, feeling butterflies at the thought of seeing him. But alongside the excitement ran a current of fear. What if the distance had changed things? What if they'd built something over phone calls that couldn't survive in-person reality? What if Mason realized that a relationship with a single mother was too complicated, too limiting for his lifestyle? Dr. Carroll addressed these fears in their therapy session. Emily, uncertainty is part of any relationship. You can't control what Mason feels or how this will turn out. All you can control is your own honesty and openness. If you keep communicating, keep being authentic, you give the relationship the best chance possible. And if it doesn't work out, then you'll survive it. You've survived worse, and you'll have tried, which is more than you've allowed yourself in years. Emily carried those words with her through the final weeks of January. When doubt crept in late at night, she reminded herself she had survived worse, and trying was better than hiding. Mason arrived on February 4th, his motorcycle rumbling up to Emily's apartment building on a cold but clear Thursday afternoon. Amber was still at school, so it was just Emily waiting on the steps, her heart pounding as she watched him park and remove his helmet. For a moment they just looked at each other, then Mason smiled, and Emily felt every worry dissolve. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. "Hi," he said against her hair. "Hi," she whispered back, breathing in the scent of leather and road and the particular smell that was uniquely him. That week was one of the best of Emily's life. Mason integrated himself seamlessly into their routines, picking Amber up from school, joining them for dinner, watching movies on the couch while Amber fell asleep between them. He fixed the leaky faucet in Emily's bathroom and the loose hinge on Amber's bedroom door. He made them breakfast on Saturday morning, filling the apartment with the smell of pancakes and bacon. They went ice skating at Millennium Park, all 3 of them, Amber squealing with delight, while Mason and Emily held her hands to keep her steady. They visited the Art Institute, where Amber discovered a love of Impressionist paintings, and Mason shared stories about museums he'd visited across the country. They had dinner at a family-owned Mexican restaurant in Pilsen, where the food was incredible and the atmosphere warm and lively. But they also made time for just Emily and Mason. On Saturday night, Mrs. Chen watched Amber while Mason took Emily to dinner at a quiet restaurant in Lincoln Park. Over candlelight and wine, they talked about the future, what this relationship could be, how to handle the distance, what each of them needed and wanted. "I can't give up the road completely," Mason said, his hand wrapped around hers on the table. "It's part of who I am, but I can be more intentional about where I ride. I can plan routes that bring me through Chicago more often. I can stay longer when I'm here. And I can't leave Chicago," Emily countered. "Amber's school, my job, our life, it's all here. I can't just pack up and follow you around the country. I'm not asking you to. Emily, I don't need you to change your life for me. I just need to know that when I come back, there's a place for me, that this means something to you like it means something to me." Emily looked into his eyes, seeing vulnerability there that matched her own. "It means everything to me. You mean everything to me. That's what scares me." "It scares me too," Mason admitted. "I haven't let myself care about someone like this in 15 years, not since my ex-wife left and I decided the road was safer than risking that kind of hurt again. But Emily, you're worth the risk, you and Amber both." Emily leaned across the table and kissed him, not caring that they were in a public restaurant, not caring about anything except expressing what she felt. "Then we make it work. However we need to. We figure it out together." The following Tuesday, Emily had to testify at Derek Mullins's preliminary hearing. She'd been dreading it for weeks, but Mason insisted on coming with her. He sat in the courtroom gallery with Amber, who'd been excused from school for the day, both of them a steady presence, as Emily took the stand and recounted the events of that November night. Seeing Derek Mullins again was harder than Emily had anticipated. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, younger, more human. But when the prosecutor asked her to identify the man who'd held a gun on her and her daughter, Emily pointed without hesitation. That's him. The hearing was brief. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and denied bail. As they left the courthouse, Emily felt shaky but relieved. Mason wrapped an arm around her shoulders and Amber took her hand. "You were so brave, Mom," Amber said. "I had brave people with me," Emily replied, looking between her daughter and Mason. "That made all the difference." That evening, on Mason's last night in Chicago, before he had to leave for a commitment in Nashville, they talked about what came next. Amber was asleep in her room, and Emily and Mason sat close together on the couch, the television on, but neither of them watching it. "I'll be back in 3 weeks," Mason said. "There's a rally in Indianapolis in early March, and from there it's an easy ride to Chicago. I can stay for a few days." "And then?" Emily asked. "Then I'll come back again, and again, as many times as I can, for as long as you'll have me." "Emily, I know this isn't conventional. I know long distance is hard. But I think we can make it work if we both commit to it." "I'm committed," Emily said. "I'm scared and it's complicated and I have no idea how we navigate this long term, but I'm committed to trying." Mason kissed her then, deep and slow, a kiss that held promises and hope and the weight of everything they were building together. The next morning, Emily and Amber once again stood outside their apartment building and watched Mason prepare to leave. But this time felt different. This time they knew he was coming back. This time they had plans, specific dates, concrete commitments. 3 weeks, Mason said, hugging Amber. "That's 21 days. You can count them down if you want." "I will," Amber promised. "And I'll text you about school and stuff. I'm counting on it." He turned to Emily, pulling her close. "I love you," he said quietly, the first time those words had been spoken between them. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but it's true. I love you, Emily Thompson." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. Travel safe, okay? Come back to us." "Always," Mason promised. Then he mounted his motorcycle, and with a final wave, he rode away into the February morning. Emily and Amber went back inside, and Emily noticed something different about the apartment. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a place that someone would return to, a home that was worth coming back for. "Mom," Amber said as they climbed the stairs, "I think we're going to be okay. All 3 of us." Emily smiled through her tears. "You know what, baby? I think you're right." Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, winter reluctant to release its grip on the city. But by late March, the first signs of renewal were visible. Crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, days gradually lengthening, the air carrying the promise of warmth to come. Mason had kept his word, returning to Chicago twice more since February. Each visit felt more natural, more integrated into the fabric of Emily and Amber's lives. He had a toothbrush in Emily's bathroom now, space in her closet for a few changes of clothes, a coffee mug that Amber had declared was his. The apartment had expanded to include him, and Emily found she liked the way it felt. Fuller, warmer, more complete. But the constant departures and reunions were taking their toll. Amber cried when Mason left now, no longer able to maintain the brave face she'd worn initially. Emily found herself counting days, marking time by Mason's absences and presences. And Mason himself seemed increasingly torn between his commitment to the road and his commitment to the 2 people who'd become his family. It was late March when everything came to a head. Mason had been in Chicago for 4 days, and tomorrow he was supposed to leave for a month-long journey through the Southwest, a trip planned long before Emily and Amber had entered his life, a commitment to brothers in the road warriors who were counting on him. They were having dinner at Emily's apartment, spaghetti and meatballs, Amber's favorite. The conversation was light, but underneath ran a current of tension that all 3 of them could feel. Finally, as Emily cleared the plates, Amber said what they'd all been thinking. "I don't want you to go." Mason looked at the 10-year-old girl who'd become so important to him, saw the tears gathering in her green eyes, and felt something in his chest crack. "I don't want to go either, sweetheart." "Then don't," Amber said simply. "Stay here, with us." Emily froze at the sink, her back to them, waiting to hear what Mason would say. Mason was quiet for a long moment. "Amber, it's not that simple. I have commitments. People are counting on me." "We're counting on you too," Amber said. And there was something in her voice. Not manipulation, not a child's tantrum, but honest pain. "Every time you leave, I'm scared you won't come back. Every time you ride away, I think maybe this is the time something bad happens and I never see you again." Emily turned around, her hands still wet from the dishwater, and saw tears streaming down Amber's face. She crossed the room and pulled her daughter into a hug, but her eyes met Mason's over Amber's head. "Baby, Mason always comes back," Emily said gently. "But what if he doesn't? What if there's an accident, or he decides he doesn't want to come back, or he meets someone else somewhere, or—" "Amber," Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. He moved to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Look at me. I will always come back. Always. And I would never want to be with anyone else. Your mom, she's it for me. And you're the daughter I never knew I needed. Nothing is going to change that. But you're still leaving tomorrow," Amber said, her voice small. "I am. Because I made a promise to my brothers, and I keep my promises. But Amber, I promise you this too, I will come back in 4 weeks, and we'll figure out a better way to do this. Your mum and I will talk about how to make this work long term, okay?" Amber nodded, but didn't look convinced. Emily's heart ached for her daughter, for Mason, for all of them trying to navigate this complicated situation. That night, after Amber finally fell asleep, Emily and Mason sat on the apartment's small balcony despite the chill. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "This is killing me," Mason said quietly. "Leaving you both, coming back, leaving again. I feel like I'm being torn in half." "Then maybe it's time to make a choice," Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mason, I love you. I love what we're building. But Amber's right. This constant cycle of goodbye is hurting her. It's hurting all of us. We can't keep doing this indefinitely." "What are you saying?" Emily took a deep breath. "I'm saying maybe we need to figure out what we really want. You need to decide if you can really build a life with us, or if the road is always going to come first. And I need to be honest about what I can accept and what I can't." Mason was quiet, staring out at the city. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I am, Emily. The road, it's been my life for 15 years. It's how I process things, how I find peace. Asking me to give that up—" "I'm not asking you to give it up completely," Emily interrupted. "I'm asking you to find a balance, to make us the priority instead of an addition to your existing life. Maybe that means shorter trips, or bringing us with you sometimes, or I don't know, Mason. I don't have all the answers, but something has to change." They sat in heavy silence for a long moment. Then Mason said, "What if I moved here, to Chicago?" Emily's heart skipped. "What? What if I got a place here? An apartment, maybe something near you and Amber? I could still ride. There are plenty of road warriors in the Midwest. We could form a chapter here. I could take trips, but shorter ones, with Chicago as my home base instead of just another stop on an endless route." He turned to look at her. "Would that be enough? Could that work?" Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mason, that's a huge change. Are you sure? I don't want you to resent us, to feel trapped." "I'm sure," Mason said firmly. "Emily, I've been running from things my whole life. Bad childhood, failed marriage, disappointments and regrets. I've been outrunning all of it for 15 years. But you and Amber, you're not something I want to run from. You're something I want to run toward. And maybe it's time I stopped running altogether and started building something real." Emily launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck, crying and laughing at the same time. "Are you serious? You'd really do that?" "I'd really do that. For you, for Amber, for us." They stayed on the balcony for hours, planning and dreaming. Mason would still take his trip tomorrow. He'd made commitments he needed to honor. But when he came back in 4 weeks, he'd start looking for an apartment. He'd talk to the road warriors about establishing a stronger presence in Chicago. He'd figure out how to merge his old life with his new one, how to be both the man who loved the open road and the man who loved Emily and Amber. The next morning, when Mason said goodbye, it felt different. Amber still cried, but there was hope mixed with the sadness. Emily kissed him and whispered, "Come home to us." "Always," Mason promised. "This time and every time. I'm coming home." The 4 weeks passed slowly, but with a sense of purpose. Emily and Amber talked about what it would mean to have Mason living in Chicago permanently. They looked at apartments online, imagining where he might live, how close he might be. Amber drew pictures of the 3 of them together, at the lakefront, at the diner, in a future she was beginning to believe in. Mason called every night as always, but now the conversations included practical details. He talked to Logan and Trevor, both of whom thought a Chicago chapter of the Road Warriors was a great idea. He'd been saving money for years with no particular goal. Now he had one. He'd even found a few apartment listings in Emily's neighborhood that looked promising. Derek Mullins's trial came and went. Emily testified again, stronger this time, more certain. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Mullins guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 12 years. Tyler Vance, who'd taken a plea deal, got 7. Emily felt a chapter close, a weight lift. The men who'd terrorized her and her daughter would be locked away for a long time. And then, on April 29th, Mason returned to Chicago. But this time, his motorcycle was accompanied by a rented truck containing his belongings. Everything he owned in the world, which turned out to be surprisingly modest. Clothes, books, tools, mementos from years on the road. The accumulation of a mobile life, now being transplanted into something stationary. Emily and Amber helped him move into a 1-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from theirs. It was small but well lit, with a view of a tree-lined street and space for Mason's motorcycle in the building's garage. As they unpacked boxes, Amber chattering excitedly about how often she could visit, Emily kept catching Mason's eye and smiling. That evening, the 3 of them went to Martha's diner for dinner. Martha herself came out to greet them, her weathered face breaking into a smile when she saw Mason. "So you're the famous biker who saved my Emily and little Amber," she said. "Just did what needed doing, ma'am," Mason said. Martha looked him over approvingly. "I hear you're staying in Chicago now. That true?" "Yes, ma'am. These 2 are worth staying for." "Good answer," Martha said, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Emily's been happier these past months than I've seen her in years. You keep making her happy, we won't have any problems." Over burgers and fries in Booth 7, always Booth 7, they talked about the future. Mason had already connected with a local mechanic shop that was looking for experienced hands. He'd set up a meeting with other local bikers about forming a Road Warriors chapter. He was building a life here day by day, decision by decision. "Are you scared?" Emily asked him later, after they'd dropped Amber back at their apartment with Mrs. Chen and gone for a walk along the still-cold lakefront. "Terrified," Mason admitted. "I haven't lived in one place for more than a few months since I left the military. I don't know if I'm going to be good at this, at being still, at being present, at being what you and Amber need." "You don't have to be perfect," Emily said. "You just have to be here, and to keep trying. That's all any of us can do." Mason stopped walking and pulled Emily close, the sound of waves lapping against the shore behind them. "I love you." and I love Amber. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make this work. I know you are. I love you too." The months that followed weren't always easy. Mason struggled sometimes with the constraints of a more settled life, with the routines and responsibilities that came with being part of a family. Emily struggled with learning to trust fully, with letting down the walls she'd built around herself and Amber. Amber had her moments of insecurity, testing to see if Mason would really stay, if this was really permanent. But they worked through it together. Mason took Amber to her therapy appointments when Emily had to work. Emily learned to encourage Mason to take weekend trips with other riders, understanding that he needed the road even if he no longer lived on it. Amber slowly began calling Mason by a name that made them all tear up the first time she said it. "My stepdad, Mason." By the time summer arrived, they'd found their rhythm. Mason proposed to Emily on her birthday in June, kneeling in Martha's diner in booth 7 with Amber and Martha and all the regular customers watching. Emily said yes through happy tears, and the entire diner erupted in applause. They were married in September in a small ceremony at a lakefront park, with Amber as Emily's maid of honor and Logan and Trevor as Mason's best men. Martha catered the reception. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears. Members of the newly formed Chicago chapter of the Road Warriors formed a motorcycle honor guard. It was simple and perfect and exactly right. That night, after the celebrations ended and Amber was asleep in her room, and Mason and Emily sat together in what was now their shared apartment, Emily thought back to that terrible November night almost a year ago. She thought about the gun, the fear, Amber's desperate cry for help. And she thought about the 3 bikers who'd walked into Martha's diner and changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Mason asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones," Emily said. "About how terror and trauma can crack us open in ways that let love in. About how grateful I am that you walked into that diner when you did." Mason kissed the top of her head. "I was just looking for a burger. Ended up finding a family instead. Best burger of your life." "Best burger of my life," Mason agreed. Amber appeared in her doorway, her rabbit clutched in one hand. "I can't sleep. Can I sit with you guys for a bit?" "Always," Emily and Mason said in unison. Amber padded over and squeezed between them on the couch, and the 3 of them sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, Chicago carried on with its endless energy. Traffic and voices and the sound of a city that never truly slept. But inside their apartment there was peace, there was family, there was home. Emily looked at her daughter and her husband and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been simple, but it had been worth every moment of fear, every tear, every uncertain step forward. "I love you both so much," she said quietly. "We love you too, Mom," Amber said, snuggling closer. "Forever," Mason added, his hand finding Emily's and squeezing gently. And in that moment, in that small apartment on South Michigan Avenue, 3 people who'd found each other through trauma and terror and the unexpected kindness of strangers sat together and knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. The road that had brought them together had been long and difficult, but it had led them home. And that, Emily thought, was the only ending that mattered. Did this story touch your heart in some way? If yes, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your thoughts, let us know what resonated with you, and don't forget to like and share this video with someone who might need to hear this story today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of courage, redemption, and hope. Thank you for being here.